The Terminator wasn't just another sci-fi action flick. It was a fever dream turned into celluloid. A scrappy underdog that fused chaos, desperation, and raw invention into a cultural juggernaut. Behind the steel and shadows lurked broken ankles, pawn shop sacrifices, lawsuits, and props rescued from thrift stores. What audiences didn't see was the madness behind the camera. The fights with studios, the mechanical nightmares, and the accidents that nearly derailed the project. Yet somehow, out of the rubble, James Cameron forged one of the most iconic films of all time. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 20 weird facts about the Terminator that reveal just how messy, dangerous, and miraculous this movie really was. Stick around until the end, because the bonus fact will make you see this killer robot in a completely different light. Let's dive in. 1. Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't the first choice. It's impossible now to imagine anyone else as the cold, unstoppable machine. But Arnold wasn't the studio's first pick. Their favorite? O.J. Simpson. Executives thought Simpson, then a football star, could pull off stealth and intimidation. James Cameron disagreed. He felt O.J. looked too likable to convince audiences he was a relentless murderer. Arnold came in only to discuss the role of Kyle Reese, but couldn't stop describing how he would play the Terminator. Cameron listened, watched Arnold's movements, and saw the character come alive before his eyes. After the meeting, Cameron turned to his team and declared, "We just found our Terminator." That chance encounter transformed not only the movie, but Arnold's entire career. The irony? The studio's first choice later became notorious for a real-life murder trial. Sometimes history writes itself with eerie precision. 2. The idea came from a fever dream. The steel skeleton of Skynet's nightmare didn't spring from careful planning. It erupted from a fever. While sick in Rome, James Cameron drifted into a nightmarish vision. A chrome figure emerging from fire, stripped of flesh, implacable and cold. The image jolted him awake. He grabbed paper and sketched it before it slipped away. At the time, Cameron was broke, working odd jobs and scraping by in a tiny apartment. Yet that single sketch became the blueprint for the movie. What audiences didn't know is that his agent hated the idea. When Cameron insisted on directing, the agent told him to drop it. Cameron fired him on the spot. This wasn't just inspiration. It was obsession. Out of fever and fire came the skeleton of a cinematic legend. A dream so vivid it still stalks our nightmares. 3. Linda Hamilton almost lost the role. Sarah Connor, the terrified waitress who becomes humanity's fiercest defender, could have looked very different. The studio didn't want Linda Hamilton. They wanted glamour, someone dazzling, someone Hollywood. James Cameron wanted grit. He wanted Sarah to look like the kind of woman you'd actually meet at a diner, someone who could believably grow into a hardened survivor. Hamilton's audition wasn't flashy, but it was raw. She impressed Cameron instantly. During production, she sprained her ankle on day 1. Most actors would have begged for time off. Not Hamilton. She ran, limped, and fought through every scene in excruciating pain. The injury, the sweat, the resolve. It all bled onto the screen. In that sense, Hamilton didn't just play Sarah Connor. She became her. 4. The line almost wasn't "I'll be back." I'll be back. 3 words that reshaped cinema and launched 1,000 impressions. But it wasn't supposed to sound like that. On paper, the line was, "I'll come back." Schwarzenegger found it awkward and asked Cameron if he could say, "I will be back," instead. Cameron, famously precise, shut it down. Just say, "I'll be back." They filmed multiple takes, but nothing felt particularly special. No one on set imagined the line would echo through movie history. When audiences first heard it, though, something clicked. It wasn't just a line. It was a threat, a promise, a prophecy. Ironically, the scene's power came from the simplicity Cameron insisted on. Not "I will," not "I'll come back," just "I'll be back." Cold, director, unstoppable. A throwaway phrase that became a legend. 5. Schwarzenegger's 58-word performance. The Terminator is one of cinema's most iconic villains, yet Arnold speaks only 58 words in the entire movie. That's it. less dialogue than most commercials. Cameron stripped the lines to emphasize silence, making the character feel more like a force of nature than a man. It wasn't what Arnold said. It was how he moved. His icy stare, his mechanical reloads, his calculated inhuman precision. Every glance and gesture replaced a page of dialogue. The silence made him scarier, an executioner who didn't need to explain himself. Still, in those 58 words came two immortal phrases. "I'll be back," and "come with me if you want to live." The strange truth, less was more. By removing Arnold's voice, Cameron unleashed his presence, and in doing so, he turned minimal dialogue into maximum impact. 6. The sunglasses were an accident. The Terminator's wraparound shades weren't part of some grand costume design. They were a cover-up. Mid-shoot, Arnold's eye prosthetic didn't sit right. The makeup edges visible under harsh lights. The solution? Hide it with dark sunglasses. A quick fix turned into an aesthetic revolution. Once Arnold slipped them on, the look clicked. Cold, expressionless, untouchable. Those glasses weren't just eyewear. They became armor, a mask that erased humanity from the killer robot's face. The crew knew they had stumbled into something special. The irony is that one of cinema's most iconic visuals was born not from design, but from panic. What audiences saw as menace was really improvisation. And that accident gave us a silhouette so recognizable that you can't picture the Terminator without it. 7. Linda Hamilton's brutal injury. If Sarah Connor looks like she's in agony when running for her life, that's because Linda Hamilton was. On the first day of filming, she sprained her ankle during a chase sequence. Rather than delay production, she powered through nearly the entire shoot injured. She ran, stumbled, and limped while cameras rolled. Every step a burst of pain. The exhaustion you see in her eyes? Real. The uneven sprint? Real. Hamilton later admitted the injury got worse as filming went on, but she refused to stop. Her determination seeped into Sarah's character arc. The fragile waitress who learns to endure. It wasn't method acting. It was survival. Both for the actress and the character. That raw authenticity transformed Sarah Connor into one of cinema's most believable heroines. 8. The endoskeleton was born in a motel. You'd think one of sci-fi's most terrifying creations would be built in a high-tech effects studio. Wrong. Stan Winston, the legendary effects artist, sculpted the Terminator's endoskeleton in a hotel room. He and Cameron spent nights sketching on napkins, surrounded by fast food wrappers and makeshift tools. Out of resin, scrap metal, and raw imagination, the chrome monster took shape. Carpet fibers clung to Winston's shoes as he refined what would become one of the most iconic designs in movie history. 9. The $1 trillion trench coat. Kyle Reese's rugged trench coat didn't come from a designer's sketchbook or studio wardrobe department. It came from a thrift store bargain rack. The wardrobe crew had almost no budget, so they scavenged for pieces that looked battered and lived in. They found a gray coat for just $1. It was ragged, worn, and perfect for a soldier who had survived Skynet's apocalypse. Michael Biehn wore it throughout the film, its weight and shape adding to his character's haunted presence. What the audience saw as costume design was really a desperate improvisation. Decades later, fans pay hundreds to replicate the exact look, unaware it started with a thrift store score. That coat, bought for the price of a soda, became a symbol of resilience in one of sci-fi's greatest films. 10. The lawsuit that changed the credits. When The Terminator hit theaters, it didn't just make money. It attracted lawsuits. Science fiction legend Harlan Ellison claimed Cameron's story copied elements from his Outer Limits episodes, Soldier and Demon with a Glass Hand. Cameron denied intentional plagiarism, but the studio feared a drawn-out battle. They settled. Ellison got paid, and his name was added to later prints of the movie. If you watch certain versions today, you'll see acknowledgement to the works of Harlan Ellison. It's one of the rare times a sci-fi writer successfully forced Hollywood to share credit. The irony? Cameron hated the settlement, insisting he hadn't stolen a thing. But history wrote Ellison's name into The Terminator, a strange footnote in the birth of an icon. And before we move on, go ahead and like and subscribe, because we're only halfway through this cybernetic rabbit hole. And the next 10 facts will show just how close the Terminator came to collapsing completely. 11. Cameron pawned everything to finish the script. Before the Terminator became a franchise juggernaut, James Cameron was broke. Completely broke. He pawned his car, his TV, even his typewriter just to survive while writing the script. Nights were spent scribbling drafts by hand in notebooks because he couldn't afford paper or ink. Friends offered him couches, and canned food was often dinner. When his agent suggested he give up, Cameron fired him on the spot. He refused to sell the script unless he could direct it himself, even turning down higher offers from studios. It was a brutal all-or-nothing gamble. The payoff? A $6.4 million film that earned over $78 million worldwide. The machine that reshaped cinema was fueled not by studio luxury, but by one man pawning his life away to keep typing. 12. Michael Biehn nearly lost the role with an accent. Kyle Reese is remembered for his quiet intensity and soldier's grit, but Michael Biehn almost blew the audition. Earlier that day, he had read for Cat on a hot tin roof on Broadway, which required a thick Southern accent. When he stepped into Cameron's audition room, the drawl lingered. Cameron frowned. Reese was supposed to sound like a hardened fighter from a bleak future, not a farm boy from Alabama. Biehn's agent quickly explained the mix-up, and Cameron gave him another chance. The second reading nailed it. But had that accent stuck, Biehn might have lost the role to someone else, possibly even Bruce Willis, who was also considered. What audiences didn't know. The savior of Sarah Connor was nearly undone by an accidental Southern twang. 13. The Terminator theme was built in a garage. That pounding metallic score that sounds like the heartbeat of a machine wasn't born in a polished studio. It came from a garage. Composer Brad Fiedel cobbled together the theme on a battered Oberheim synthesizer that constantly glitched. Instead of fighting it, he embraced the broken rhythms. The off-kilter beat echoed a human pulse, but fractured, mechanical, and cold. Cameron loved it instantly. Fiedel wanted the music to sound relentless, like a machine chasing you down a dark alley. He succeeded. Against all odds, the garage-born track became one of sci-fi's most recognizable themes. The irony? A machine breaking down created the perfect sound for a movie about machines that don't stop. That relentless thump-thump still haunts theaters, homes, and nightmares to this day. 14. Cameron was writing Aliens and Rambo 2 at the same time. While the Terminator crawled toward production, Cameron wasn't just writing one script. He was juggling three. On one desk sat the Terminator. On another, Aliens. And on a third, Rambo. First Blood Part 2. He literally rotated between desks in the same cramped apartment, shifting between jungle warfare, space terror, and robot apocalypse. Sleep was minimal, deadlines brutal. Yet somehow, Cameron balanced it all, building three separate franchises that would dominate the 1980s. What audiences didn't know is that while Sarah Connor ran from a killer machine, Ripley was also being shaped in Cameron's mind. The madness of splitting his focus could have collapsed everything, but instead, it forged some of the most legendary action films ever made. 15. Kyle Reese's emotional breakdown was cut. In early drafts, Reese wasn't just stoic and battle-hardened. He was broken. Michael Biehn filmed a scene where Reese trembles, confessing the trauma of a life lived in Skynet's ruins. He describes his fear, guilt, and crushing loneliness. It was raw, devastating, and one of Biehn's most intense performances. But Cameron cut it. The scene slowed the pacing, making Reese appear too fragile for audiences to trust as a protector. The footage still exists, locked in vaults. A glimpse of a different Reese. Haunted, human, deeply wounded. What audiences didn't know is that beneath the trench coat and grit, Kyle Reese carried more pain than the film ever revealed. Sometimes to keep momentum. The most emotional truths never make it to the screen. 16. One man animated the Terminator frame by frame. Those haunting shots of the metal endoskeleton limping through the factory weren't CGI. They were painstaking stop motion. Effects artist Doug Beswick animated the figure one frame at a time, adjusting its limbs by fractions of an inch, snapping a photo, then repeating the process. Days of work produced mere seconds of footage. The challenge wasn't just motion. It was matching the lighting and tone of live-action shots. Cameron was relentless in demanding precision. The result was eerie and unforgettable. A machine that felt real even though it was only inches tall. What audiences didn't know was that this illusion of inevitability was born from patience, sweat, and a single man's obsession. The factory chase scene stands as proof that sometimes the scariest monsters are built one frame at a time. 17. The original script had two Terminators. James Cameron's first vision was far bigger than budget allowed. In early drafts, two Terminators were sent back. One resembled Arnold's Cold T-800, while the other was a liquid metal prototype. It could morph into shapes, mimic people, and slip through barriers. Cameron loved the idea but quickly realized the technology of 1984 simply couldn't pull it off convincingly. The effects would have bankrupted the production, so he shelved it, saving the concept for years later. In 1991, that idea resurfaced as the T-1000 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, one of the most terrifying and groundbreaking villains in sci-fi history. What audiences didn't know is that the seeds of that nightmare were already in the script of the original. Cameron was simply waiting for the future to catch up. 18. Arnold has only 16 minutes of screen time for a movie called The Terminator. The star barely appears. Arnold is only on screen for about 16 minutes in a film that runs nearly 2 hours. Yet his presence feels constant. Cameron designed it that way. The Terminator was death itself, always lurking, even when unseen. Like the shark in Jaws, the less you saw, the more you feared. Every time Arnold appeared, it mattered. Every scene carved itself into memory. It wasn't about volume. It was about impact. Audiences left theaters feeling as though the machine had stalked them for hours. What they didn't realize is that the true terror came from restraint. Less screen time. More dread. That's the brilliance of Cameron's pacing. And the reason Arnold became a legend off a role that was shockingly brief. 19. Cameron and Gale Anne Hurd's secret romance behind the lens. Another story unfolded. James Cameron and producer Gale Anne Hurd weren't just creative partners. They were secretly dating during production. Determined to avoid gossip, they kept it hidden from the crew, even as they spent long nights rewriting dialogue and fighting studio resistance together. Hurd wasn't just supportive emotionally. She was essential to the film's survival. She brokered deals, defended casting choices like Linda Hamilton, and even agreed to Cameron's famous $1 contract. He sold her the rights to the Terminator on the condition he would direct. Their romance surfaced only after the film's success, and the two married in 1985. Though the marriage didn't last, their collaboration changed sci-fi forever. What audiences didn't know is that the love story behind the camera was as intense as the one on screen. 20th. The Terminator was dressed in thrift store survival gear. While blockbuster films often boast million-dollar wardrobes, the Terminator survived on scraps. Kyle Reese's trench coat, the one fans now pay hundreds to replicate, cost just $1 at a thrift store. The crew scavenged for clothing that looked authentic to a soldier from a ruined future. The coat's frayed edges, worn fabric, and lived-in look gave Reese a visual history that no amount of tailoring could fake. It was practical, raw, and utterly convincing. Ironically, what began as a desperate money-saving choice turned into an iconic piece of sci-fi fashion. What audiences didn't know was that every thread told the story of survival, both for the character and the filmmakers who fought to finish a movie on a shoestring budget. Bonus fact: a lawsuit that almost erased the film. The greatest threat to the Terminator wasn't Skynet. It was Hollywood lawyers. After release, sci-fi author Harlan Ellison sued, claiming Cameron stole ideas from his Outer Limits scripts. Cameron denied it, but Orion Pictures caved, settling out of court and adding Ellison's name to future prints. Cameron was furious, saying, "I had no choice but to agree." The strange twist? Had the case gone further, distribution could have been blocked, killing the film before it grew into a franchise. What audiences didn't know is that the Terminator nearly disappeared into legal limbo. A single lawsuit could have erased the killer robot from history. Instead, it survived, proving that sometimes the deadliest machines aren't built of chrome, but of contracts and signatures. From fever dreams in Rome to motel room monsters, From thrift store wardrobes to lawsuits that nearly buried it, the Terminator wasn't built in Hollywood luxury. It was forged in chaos, desperation, and relentless vision. Every broken ankle, every pawned typewriter, every late-night sketch bled into the film's DNA. What audiences didn't know was that the Terminator wasn't inevitable. It was fragile, on the brink of collapse at every turn. And yet, against all odds, it became one of the most enduring sci-fi stories ever told. So next time you hear "I'll be back," remember? It wasn't just a catchphrase. It was a promise born of sweat, sacrifice, and survival.